Business is a statement by Fiona Hislop on a BiFab update. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Fiona Hislop.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to make a further statement today on BiFab. In 2016, the owners of BiFab sought to sell the business. At that point, DF Barnes became involved in the process and achieved preferred bidder status. The negotiations were paused when the Managing Director of BiFab sadly passed away. It subsequently became clear that BiFab would require external funding to be able to complete the works on the Beatrice offshore wind farm contract. In 2017, the Scottish Government stepped in and provided a loan facility of £15 million. In April 2018, the company was purchased by DF Barnes. As part of that deal, the Scottish Government agreed to increase its existing commercial loan facility to £41 million to be used specifically for the completion of the Beatrice contract and to provide a second loan facility of up to £10 million for restructuring and working capital requirements. Ultimately, £37.4 million of the original loan facility was used, and as agreed in the sale process in April 2018, this was converted to an equity stake of 32.4%. Subsequent loan monies provided by the Scottish Government sit as a liability on BiFab's balance sheet. The financial support provided by the Scottish Government ensured that the Beatrice contract secured work at the 3 yards, providing employment for around 250 permanent staff, with a further 1,100 employed via agencies to support specific contracts at peak construction. The Murray East Pin Piles contract securing 90 jobs in Arnish for around 8 months. A Nigerian oil and gas contract from East E&P for work at Burnt Island and Methil for 250 contractors. It was clear in 2018 that to be successful, to secure and deliver new contracts, BiFab required working capital. It required appropriate assurance packages by the shareholders, and it needed investment at the sites. However, the majority shareholder made a commercial decision not to provide the support to the business in a way we would expect of a majority shareholder, and as a result was unable to secure future work. If the majority shareholder won't invest, then almost by definition, investment by central government can only be seen as a subsidy. Investment by government must be on the same basis as a commercial investor. When the pipeline of future work was adversely affected by SSE Renewables' decision not to award the Sea Green work to BiFab, the commercial position changed. I've been asked why we couldn't invest at that time. This is simply because there was no prospect of a commercial return. A commercial investor would not have invested, so we were unable to do so. By investing, we would only have been providing subsidy with no prospect of a return. This fact is key to the state aid position. As a minority shareholder, we have been exhaustive in our consideration of the options available to us to financially support BiFab. We have worked collaboratively with the United Kingdom Government to explore all options, and we have not identified a legally compliant way to support the business. Deloitte were appointed as administrators on Monday, the 14th of December. We will work with them and trade unions to secure a new future for the yards in Fife and the Western Isles, helping ensure that they are able to diversify and compete in this competitive market. The Scottish Government has engaged directly with the appointed administrators to understand from them their current strategy and plans for the workforce in the immediate term, and to shape that to reflect our priorities for the workforce and the yards. I have also agreed that the Scottish Government will fund the administrators' initial work. This includes paying the workforce whilst a sale of business process is pursued, and should there be insufficient funds in the business to do so. This will avoid any immediate redundancies, and I'm sure this will be welcome news for the workforce. We remain hopeful that a buyer willing to invest in the business will be found, and we will work closely with administrators and trade unions to secure the best possible outcome for the workforce, the yards and the local communities. The administrator is now responsible for all management and operational decisions at BiFab. The administrator will form their own independent assessment of the position of the company and will implement a strategy to maximise the return to all of BiFab's creditors. As a secured creditor with a considerable outstanding debt, the Scottish Government has a significant interest in the administration process and will work closely with the appointed administrator throughout the coming days and weeks. The administration process is governed by legislation, and the Administrator is bound to act in the interests of all creditors. The Scottish Government seeks a positive future for the workforce and the sites, and stands ready to work with credible parties who share our objectives. The process of securing a buyer for the business is a process for the Administrator to manage. We will, of course, work closely with the Administrator to support the marketing process in any way we can. While the chances are receding, I would reiterate my desire to see the LNG contract fulfilled from these yards. I have written to Saipem on 2 occasions in recent weeks, expressing my hope that the LNG contract for 8 jackets can still be completed in Scotland, but I am aware that they have gone to the market to seek alternatives. We are setting up a joint working group with the United Kingdom Government to rally the collective efforts of government around securing a strong future for BiFab sites. While that group must respect the live administration process, it will position both governments to stand ready to work with potential new investors. Officials met with the United Kingdom Government counterparts last Thursday to discuss the group's terms of reference and membership, including how we involve key Scottish stakeholders. I remain keen that the voice of our trade unions is heard as part of this process and will continue to press for that. Our immediate focus is on delivering a sustainable future for the yards and the workforce. We remain committed to supporting Scottish supply chain growth and to bringing inward investment opportunities to Scotland. This will create employment and help build our economy by capitalising on our natural resources. We have demonstrated that commitment with a series of initiatives. The Renewable Energy Investment Fund investing £70.3 million in 39 companies, leveraging additional investment of £168.5 million. We have created a £62 million Energy Transition Fund. The Green New Deal and Green Recovery is our coherent and strategic approach to Scotland's transition to net zero emissions by 2045. Nonetheless, we must do more. The Crown Estate Scotland leasing round must deliver benefit for the Scottish supply chain. This is an opportunity for Scotland that we should not miss. Both Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise will work in partnership with stakeholders and communities to ensure that resources are properly targeted to achieve a maximum impact for Fife, the Isle of Lewis and Scotland as a whole. With a collective effort, we can and must deliver for Scotland. Beyond a purely Scottish focus, we have been calling on the United Kingdom Government to reform the contract for difference process and make greater use of supply chain plans within that process. The United Kingdom should not award contracts solely on price, but should weigh the contribution of the bid to domestic supply chains to ensure a better outcome for us all. Despite our efforts, BiFab is now in administration. My view is the best outcome is if the business can be sold as a going concern. And for that reason, and to support the workforce, I have agreed to fund the administrator's work in the short term in the event that there are insufficient funds available in the business to do that. Over the longer term, we must pick up the opportunities and challenges offered by our Green New Deal to provide the best possible outcome for the yards and for Scotland.
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. And it would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement? We had a good question and answer session at the Economy Committee yesterday, and I made clear my views that the Scottish Government has mishandled the spending of more than £50 million of public money. Saving jobs is a good thing, and investing in a key sector such as this is important, but it should come with a degree of influence. The Scottish Government put in tens of millions of pounds into BiFab, but didn't even have a seat on the board. The company went into administration because the government would not provide guarantees which could have secured the vital LNG contract, citing state aid rules. 500 staff were preparing to return to work on that contract, and it's them I want to ask about today. They will perhaps be thinking of the words of the First Minister at Methill in April 2018, when she announced so-called new investment at BiFab investment, which amounted to £4, and said, "We are delivering on a commitment to stand by BiFab and work to secure a long-term future for the company." Today, those words have a hollow ring about them. So, focusing on the workers, can the Cabinet Secretary say what discussions she's had with unions? Has a working group been set up with the unions? And for how long will the Scottish Government pay the workers through the administrators, and how much?
Cabinet Secretary.
There were a number of questions in that. I would address the issue of working with the trade unions. I have had regular contact with the trade unions, a number of meetings. Indeed, my last meeting with the STC was on the 3rd of December. We've also had Unite and GMB present at a number of those meetings. My officials are in contact with the STC on a daily basis, so that regular contact is there, and particularly at this time informing the strategy that we would want to persuade the administrators, respecting obviously their legally independent position, to follow. In that case, it is about making sure that there is a regular pipeline of business that can be secured, which were singularly absent. And indeed, in the 2-hour question and answer session that Graham Simpson referred to, one of the issues was what contracts had been bid for and what had been secured. And clearly, during the course of the last period, the issue of the lack of continuing contracts was very, very pertinent indeed. But I want to address his initial point. His point about investment by the Scottish Government to support the completion of the vitally important Beatrice contract is put at question by the Conservatives. Their view is the Scottish Government should not have stepped in, should not have tried to save the yards, and should have not have supported the workforce. That is the premise of his question. And in terms of the investment by the private company in a private purchase of the shares of BiFab back at the time, it's not uncommon for acquisitions of distressed businesses to be for low value. BiFab was not acquired out of administration, and therefore those existing liabilities to creditors, the exposure to future claims and other aspects were still liable for by JV Driver for that position. But we want to support the yard. We have invested in the yard. We have supported the yard. If the position of the Conservative Government is we either had full nationalisation or we walked away completely, as the Conservatives would have done in 2018, that is unacceptable to the workforce, it's unacceptable to Fife and the Isle of Lewis, and it's unacceptable to Scotland.
For Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary for prior sight of her statement. These yards are crucial in importance to Scotland's renewable pipeline, and it's very disappointing that they're now in administration due to the Scottish Government reneging on their guarantee. And while we welcome their paying for the workforce and administrators in the interim, I can't help but wonder if this investment would have been better spent on the guarantee and securing the Nyashnagai contract. There appears to be hope of a buyer to be found for BiFab and hope of still securing the Nyashnagai contract. And this calls into question the Scottish Government's defence of state aid rules, even if these were still a consideration beyond Brexit. Can I ask what is the cost of the Scottish Government paying for the workforce and administrators in the interim? Will that include re-employing care and maintenance staff at Arnish, and whether they have discussed with the administrators the decoupling of the Arnish yard from BiFab?
Cabinet Secretary.
There are a number of points in that, and if I don't answer all those points, I will come back to the member. I mean, clearly, in relation to state aid, it's not a trivial thing. It's not something that can be put aside. And as of now, on the 16th of December, we still don't know what the state aid provisions will be in relation to the UK and the EU, because the level playing field, i.e. business competitiveness and subsidy, is still part of those discussions. And I would reiterate what I said, and I would refer the member to my evidence yesterday in committee. The point at which the ministers make their decision is the point at which the state aid application is needed. So therefore, we didn't renege on an assurance. We gave an agreement in principle in relation to the energy assurance at the point in time where there was commercial returns envisaged, where there was a pipeline in terms of provision. And that's very important in terms of those aspects. She's asked specific issues around the provision for payment. That will depend on how much the existing resources within the company can be used. I think that would give you some indication about how perilous the financial situation was for that company, and obviously has led the board themselves to move into administration. But I will come back in terms of the provision, and that would we need to obviously ask the administrator in terms of who exactly is covered by the provision on the staffing costs. But I think it's very important that we support the wages of the staff through this very, very difficult time. There are about 30, we understand, in terms of full-time, but there are also temporary, and she might be referring to those in terms of care and maintenance aspects. And Arnish in particular, I will come back to her on. The point about decoupling, we've obviously speaking to the trade unions, but also with Highlands and Islands Enterprise and in the SE in terms of what might be suitable. So clearly, the point about decoupling Arnish may be on the table, but it depends on who comes forward and what their interests are. But certainly having more regular work for Arnish is absolutely essential, and also making sure that the provision ties in with the requirements for the Isle of Lewis in particular, and in relation to the blue economy that's been developing and obviously in a very strong prospective state there. So we're very conscious of that, and we're making sure that all these aspects are relayed to the administrators so they have a full understanding of particular needs. But I can't commit what the administrators will do in terms of decoupling or whatever, but clearly those positions and that positioning has been put to them as part of the interests that may develop as far as Irish is concerned compared to methyl.
Alistair Allen, to be followed by Gordon Linter.
I understand from what the Cabinet Secretary is saying today, and she's right to say it, that the best future for BiFab is as a going concern. But like many, I continue to hear that a number of companies may have expressed an interest in making use of the site at Arnish. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for an update on what is being done to engage with and encourage any such interests, and how this will factor into the administration process?
Cabinet Secretary.
So he's correct that there are a number of parties that have interests, and any parties who express interest in any of the BiFab sites will be directed appropriately to the administrator to make their interest known, while the Scottish Government stands ready to support any credible party willing to take on the business. I would reiterate what I said to Rhoda Grant. This is really the process for the administrator to manage in the first instance. But as I said, we are working closely with the administrator to support the marketing decisions, and certainly in the Arnish site, to any interest, we were asking them to engage with the administrator. The point of reference is obviously the interests of unions, Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Their view is that a truly successful outcome for Arnish must support year-round economic activity, and we want to make it clear to the administrator that the priority is securing long-term sustainable employment rather than peaks and troughs, and we want prospective tenants to demonstrate the ability to provide a pipeline of activity. And the local member of the constituency will be aware of the very positive announcement of investment in Stornoway Harbour, so therefore that growth of the blue economy and the opportunities for the island are very, very strong, and we want to make sure whatever happens in Arnish, we would like that to be part of that wider blue economy reach that the island can have. Gordon
Lyndhurst, to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
The Cabinet Secretary said in her statement, despite our efforts, BiFab is now in administration. Yesterday, before the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, she repeated the Scottish Government position that it will not produce the legal advice received on BiFab or release the pre-acquisition business plan. How is anyone to know what efforts the Scottish Government has actually made without sight of the relevant paperwork? Why the secrecy and lack of transparency?
I've been extremely transparent. I have had several meetings with local MSPs and MPs. I've obviously had my session with the committee yesterday. And, you know, I know that we're in the chamber and not in the committee, but I will reiterate what I said to the committee, in which I think members fully understand that it is not available to me under the Ministerial Code to release legal advice that we have received. We can confirm the existence of legal advice, but not the content. However, I have made clear that some of the issues that surround that, but I kind of think that by now you would understand that is not possible. We wrote to MSPs, interested MSPs, to explain the context of some of the issues around the market economy investor principle and some of the other aspects around that. I also shared that in a letter to the same member in his capacity as convener. In relation to the pre-acquisition business plan, I think it would be a good idea if the committee could see that, but I explained yesterday at the request that really is an issue for the company to agree on. They haven't agreed to do that as yet. And in terms of commercial and confidence, we operate with many, many different businesses for many different reasons. If at any point in time, in terms of their documents, and remember that's their document, if we were to release that more widely to committees that could then be made public, that obviously could compromise the relationship and trust that any company would have in working with any future government, and not least the Scottish Conservatives, if they ever aspired to be in government, which I think is a bit doubtful on the basis of the two questions that he's just asked.
Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased indeed to hear of the close engagement on the part of the Scottish Government with the trades unions, and I'm indeed very pleased to hear that the Scottish Government is committed to cover the wages as necessary of the workforce whilst a sale of business process is pursued. In that respect, can the Cabinet Secretary advise what funds, if any, are in the business? And if this is not yet known, when will that information likely become available?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly that is the role of the Administrator to look at the balance book of the business and the assets and indeed liabilities, and clearly in terms of the decision of the board themselves and the position the company was in, I think it probably relays an understanding of the urgency and immediacy in which decisions had to be taken by the board because of the financial situation. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to do this at this time, but I will check with the administrators what would be made available more publicly. But of course, it may influence the future sale and purchase. And I think as of now, the main interest, I think for all of us, is to try and ensure that the company is sold as a going concern. I think that needs to be the focus of our attention. But I will try and understand the position of the administrators in relation to the sharing of the information that she asked for.
Claire Baker, to be followed by Mark Roscoe.
Thank you, President Officer. I am disappointed by the lack of urgency in the statement, and my top priority is to secure the NNG contract and the up to 500 jobs and apprenticeship opportunities that would come to Fife, and I'm not prepared to give that up. The Cabinet Secretary says she's written to SIPEM in recent weeks. I'm afraid that's not good enough. What does the Cabinet Secretary have to say to those workers who are relying on the NNG contract, and what are the conditions that will mean these jobs can be brought to Fife?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I haven't waited to just now, or even the last few weeks, to try and ensure that despite the problems that the BiFab as a company had, that there would be opportunities for the NNG contract to be delivered for the workforce. I said in my statement, if you listen to the statement, that for me is still something that I want to pursue. I had spoken, I had a meeting long before she took interest in this, long before Claire Baker asked for engagement with EDF or SIPEM, long before she did that in this chamber.
When did you ever visit the site?
Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, can I reassure Claire Baker that all along we have tried to secure the jobs, okay? I don't question her interests and what she's doing in terms of trying to support the workforce at this time. I think it's wrong for her to say there's a lack of urgency, because even before the period of administration, we were working with EDF and SIPEM. This would be before she would be aware of the administration or indeed the threat of administration. Even at that time, I was working to try and find a way with EDF and SIPEM to secure the NNG contract, despite the inability of JV Driver themselves to provide any financial assurance. So I can say to her that I was previously focused on this. I continue to be focused on this. But again, we are not in control of that process. If that can be achieved, and I have said to her previously, if there was a possibility that SIPEM even at the tendering that they're doing just now for those 8 jackets, so could secure the tender from somebody that is prepared. And we understand there may have been interest, but that's a matter for SIPEM. In doing that at BiFab, we will do what we can to ensure that happens. And that's why I was very pleased to hear back from SIPEM that they will keep me informed of the process of what they're doing.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Willie Ray.
Deloitte, the administrators, said in the Courier newspaper yesterday, and I quote, "We believe the skills of the BiFab workforce and the strategically important facilities can be utilised to take advantage of future market opportunities." So the work is clearly not going away. There's still work that's available for Fife to bid into. But does the Scottish Government want a seat on the board of BiFab going forward? And if it does, how will it achieve that? How will it get on the board without future investment?
Cabinet Secretary.
So it's very difficult to deal in hypotheticals because we don't know what the interest is. We know there's interest in terms of selling the company as a going concern. In terms of what we can do, it's obviously very difficult, and this comes back to the state aid rules of, in any case, whether it's under the market economy investor principle or indeed block state aid for a government, either as a shareholder or indeed as a government, to invest in a failing company. And that's one of the basic things in relation to companies in terms of a financially failing company. But in terms of what we can do going forward, that's exactly what we're looking at, is in terms of what an investor coming in with the prospects of securing, as he said, the future pipeline of work that is there. But the arrangements for any sale, obviously subject to the administrator, I can't give that answer, but obviously part of my commitment to Mark Ruskell as an MSP with a regional interest, and indeed other constituency and regional MSPs, is to try and keep you as informed as I can. But if you can respect that obviously a lot of these issues are to be answered by the administrator, and I can't do that on their behalf.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by David Torrance.
Claire Baker's right. The Cabinet Secretary is just repeating the same old excuses as the last time that she was in the chamber. And to tell us that BiFab or Scotland probably won't be building the 8 NND jackets. When is the Minister going to deliver the jobs she promised instead of managing decline? And the Cabinet Secretary says she has written to SIPEM twice. But what did they say when she spoke to them?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in relation to the EDF discussion, because obviously EDF are the developers and SIPEM have won that contract, that was a very early discussion, as I said, in answer to Claire Baker. In terms of securing the jobs, and again, it's not been touched by anybody at this point, there is a welcome, and I think probably overdue, consultation by the UK Government on the contracts for difference. I think that's very welcome. The deadline for that is January, and it's very important that there is a dramatic change in those issues in terms of what they relay. Why is that important? Because we have got the improvements that I think are very important in terms of that statement of procurement and supply statement is part of the ScotWind leasing, but actually we understand that those that are applying for the ScotWind leases will also want to apply for contract for difference. So there's a real opportunity if the UK Government can change the contract for difference instead of being a race to the bottom on the price to enable supply chain development in Scotland, that actually those jobs that I've been talking about, the government has been talking about, that are already being secured by some of the other investments that we've been talking about, can actually be realised. But until such times as that contract for difference changes, there is a hamstrung situation. And if the member has looked at the evidence that has been given to the Economy Committee by the industry itself, by EDF, by JV Driver, and indeed by other witnesses, they will know that the key to unlocking the opportunities for jobs will be a change to that contract for difference. There is a possibility, and I think it would be very welcome if this Parliament collectively could ensure that the UK Government has a strong understanding of the vital importance of moving and changing their provisions in the contract for difference.
David Torrance, to be followed by Alexander.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's clear that UK policy context presents challenges. The contract for difference rules are seen to work against the Scottish supply chain. Does the Cabinet Secretary share these concerns, and can the Cabinet Secretary provide any further detail as to how the Scottish Government think the rules could be reformed to support the wider economy and our response to a climate emergency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think these are tied in together, and indeed tackling the climate emergency and our evidence of the climate change plan that has been published today, I think gives you the strong evidence of our commitment, our support, and indeed the levels of investment that will be involved in that. The greater use of supply chain plans as part of the contract for difference would make a real and material difference to the opportunities for Scottish supply chains to get the work, get the jobs and support that. It needs a dramatic shift. That opportunity is there. In my previous answer, I relayed the point about the current ScotWind, the tenders as part of that are expected to apply for contract for difference. We understand that those auctions, the CFD auction round, is due to commence in the autumn of next year, and ideally that gives a provision between the supply chain statements that we have from the Crown Estate provision and an improved contract for difference, that in and of itself would ensure a very, very strong position for Scotland's supply chain.
Alexander Stewart, to be followed by Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the statement you say the Green New Deal and the Green Recovery is our coherent and strategic approach to Scotland's transition to net zero emissions by 2045. Therefore, Cabinet Secretary, when is Scotland going to become the Saudi Arabia of renewables?
Cabinet Secretary.
So if the member, to be fair, may have not had the opportunity to see the climate change statement that has been published today and the plan within that, also as part of that, there's a climate change skills action plan, which is about ensuring that we have the skill base to ensure that we can support the job. So I would encourage the member, and I appreciate that it's very short notice, but I would encourage the member to look at that. In terms, therefore, of the companies, there are about over 600 companies in this arena. There are many of them that are working very effectively. There is a real opportunity in relation not just to offshore wind, also to look at the onshore wind aspect, but also hydrogen indeed. And again, if you look at the statements that are being produced during this period, that he will realise that there is real ambition there, backed up by investment and opportunity for jobs. So I would encourage him to look at that. And I think in terms of those aspects, there is a clear path. There are hurdles that have to be overcome, not least contract for difference, but with the collective will, not just of our government, but the Parliament, I think we can secure that.
Richard Lyle, to be followed by Alex Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This really all comes down to securing contracts for BiFab duty price. And I appreciate, sadly, that the Scottish Government is bound by state aid rules, limiting the action it can take to support BiFab going forward. For the sake of clarity, can the Cabinet Secretary provide any further details of these limitations and whether we can change these rules which are affecting BiFab?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in terms of the issues around state aid, we don't know what the situation will be after January. I think it's disingenuous to give the impression by MD, I'm not saying that MD specifically in this chamber, but there seems to be a general attitude that state aid won't exist after EU exit. That isn't the case. It will just exist in a different form, even under the provisions of WTO rules, or indeed, I suspect, because the level playing field is a key aspect of the negotiations, that there will be a format within that. One of the key aspects of state aid in relation to our position is the market economy investor principle. I have relayed that to many members in terms of the letters that I've written to them. The essence of the market economy investor principle is that when a public authority invests in an enterprise on terms and conditions that would be acceptable to a private investor operating under normal market economy conditions, the investment is not a state aid within the terms of that article. This requires an assessment supported by appropriate financial evidence demonstrating that the proposed investment is forecast to produce an acceptable commercial rate of return. This analysis does not take into account any wider policy objectives which may be achieved as a result of the intervention. Only commercial considerations can be taken into account. I have relayed to the Chamber, the UK Government's position, that legally and commercially they themselves also would not be able to provide state aid compliant support. So it's not just the Scottish Government that have said this, the UK Government have also made that point. So I hope that gives you the context of the issues and the pressures under which we have been placed.
And Alex Rowley.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government were absolutely correct to put the investment in to complete the Beatrice contracts, and the Scottish Tories should really stop trying to get cheap headlines on the back of workers' jobs. But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if it was correct and not in breach of state aid rules to put £37 million in to rescue BiFab, why then was it in breach of state aid rules to give the guarantee for the contract for the NNG, which had been already secured, to be delivered? And can I also ask her, DS Barnes have confirmed to the Economy Committee that they offered the Scottish Government all the shares in BiFab free of charge. The company that's building the wind farm off the coast of Fife and shipping the product halfway around the world is a French state-owned company. What's wrong with us looking at public ownership of these companies for Scotland to try and get these jobs for Scottish workers?
Cabinet Secretary.
On the issues of transfer of shares to the Scottish Government, we seriously looked at what would be possible with a transfer of share and public ownership. We would have still been prevented in terms of state aid from investing and financially supporting that company, and that was the problem of that proposal. So we looked very seriously at that, but that is the situation we find ourselves in. In relation to the position of the Beatrice contract, at that point there was a significant series of contracts that were available for tender and securing. And so therefore, in terms of that point about the commercial situation, the prospects for future contracts, etc., that was provided. Remember, that was an investment before the Scottish Government was a stakeholder. There was obviously a strategic interest in that Beatrice contract. I think he's absolutely right to say to the Conservatives that it's not right or fair for the workers to try and take the situation of the Beatrice contract and the funding of that and try and make out that somehow that was a problem. That was a solution, not just to the workforce, but also for the Beatrice contract. But it was state aid compliant, and we did examine that at the time in relation to the Beatrice contract. Clearly, as I've just relayed, if you heard my answer to Richard Lyle, the market economy investor principle, particularly obviously as a shareholder, put us in a different situation in relation to the funding of a company that was obviously in distress, obviously at the time, or in danger of going into cash flow negative for a whole period of weeks and months recently. So I hope that gives a technical explanation to his inquiry on that.
That concludes questions on the statement. My apologies to John Mason, as we now must move on to the next item of business. Can I remind members exiting and entering the chamber to observe the social distancing rules which are in place across the campus? The next item of business